All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. We are back with the 7 Threats in Our Time series with Del Tackett. We are on threat number 5, the rise of a demonic worldview and the national rift. Del, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Greg. It's good to be back with you.
So this is one of the, as we've been talking about here before the show, this is one we could talk for hours and hours on.
Yes.
I think about the worldview and how it captures individuals and there's the traditional sins, right? You've got traditional sins like of greed and impure sex, thievery, other forms of debauchery. But this is much more pervasive in some ways. This is something different. It's a different animal, a worldview that really does require your heart, might, mind, and strength as you get adopted into it. I'm going to start off with one of your quotes here. It says, "It is dangerous to ignore the reality of Satan and his forces. I am not a person who sees a demon behind every bush, but to run to the other side of the continuum and act as if there is no spiritual warfare is folly and contrary to plain biblical teaching." We seem to be rife for a worldview coming in, a different worldview and perspective on life. It seems to me very much because of this issue here that we ignore the reality of evil. Is this not true?
I think it really is. And of course, to some extent, you could say, once you throw God out, as a culture, publicly and in the public square and everything, when you throw God out, then you throw out an understanding of what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil, and we fall into, what God told us in the scriptures, that men begin to call good evil and evil good. And we find ourselves in that kind of a situation today. But as you were saying, when we fail to understand that, we also fail to understand that there is a spiritual battle going on, and we need to recognize that there are evil forces that impend upon us. And if we're not aware of that, then we are foolish. We fall into a folly that we do not recognize that there are forces that are pushing all of this. I'm not talking about conspiracy, I'm just talking about the reality of a spiritual force that is driving us into this kind of a worldview thinking.
So the worldview we're talking about is something really that, and we'll call it out for what it is. It's Marxism, or at least it's rooted in Marxism. And as you say here, a lot of people will give the proverbial eye roll when they hear this. We seem to have been conditioned in the West now to ignore this. And it's the same idea of putting your head in the sand and saying there is no evil. If we simply look back at the atrocities of the 20th century, and what Marxism caused, we should try and learn lessons from the past and understand that this virus has simply mutated to move from the proletariat and the bourgeoisie into more identity and cultural positions in our society. Isn't what we're experiencing here in many things that could be tied to a social justice movement very similar, with similar tenets of what Marxism expressed and the atrocities that came from it in the 20th century?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a very, very close tie. In fact, I don't shy away from calling it Marxism, because it is. If you really look at the 3 fundamental tenets of what Marx and Engels had laid forward into what I believe is a worldview. So it captures everything. It attempts to answer questions about all of life around us. That's why we call it a worldview. It's a demonic worldview, but if you look at the tenets, the fundamental basic tenets that come from that, and that includes Lenin and what he added to all of this. But number one, think about it, it pits people against each other. You talked about originally Marx, the people he could easily pit against each other because there was no middle class. It was the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And so his attempt to bring about that conflict because his theory was based upon several things: naturalism, evolution, the dialectic of history, and a scathing atheism. Okay, so that's what Marxism kind of rests upon, that worldview. And so that dialectic of history would say, and evolution would say, if we can bring these people into this conflict, then a higher form will arise from that, which he eventually thought was socialism and communism. So the number one tenet was to pit people against each other. Well, I mean, as you know, one of the things that happened was America had this vibrant middle class. And it's very hard to get a middle class to believe that you're oppressed. When they have one or two cars, they have running water, they have a good job, they have vacation time, they have an opportunity to work hard and get it. So it's hard to tell the middle class that you are oppressed. And so what happened, as you are aware, with the rebirth of Marxism in Western civilization and America in particular, is they had to find a new oppressed class. And of course, what they came up with was to say that, hey, what if we could get people to understand they're not oppressed financially, but they're oppressed culturally. And so that gave rise to the notion of minorities, that minority groups were oppressed by this hegemonic power. And so that was now their new form of being able to pit classes against each other. Yeah, it comes right out of the old Marxism worldview school.
Yeah. So let's just real briefly go over this for our listeners. You have Marxism. It's starting to be put into play by Lenin in Russia. We end up with the Soviet Union. You and I are Cold War kids. We were a part of this. We saw this. I remember when I was, in elementary school, we'd have bomb drills, and we'd get under our desks. I don't know why that would matter or how that would help or shelter anyone, but it wasn't for shooters, right? It was actually for being bombed from our enemies, right? From the Cold War. And this Cold War was formed off of worldviews and an expansion of Marxism and communism that was going on in the world. Now you go back and you say, okay, well, why, in the communist view, in the Marxist view, they believe that everybody would accept this naturally. And because we can throw off the shackles of the oppressors and the elite, et cetera. Well, it doesn't take in the West. And so Gramsci, an Italian Marxist who's in prison, writes all these notes, and he talks about how this should be adopted in the West, how it can be adopted in the West, which is interesting because it's no longer even economic necessarily. I mean, you've got a little bit of that there, but he moves into what we would call today cultural Marxism. And I'm just giving a very brief history here, but you have a handful of Marxists in the Frankfurt School in Germany who adopt Gramsci's teachings and want to know how we can move this into the West. They aren't actually accepted very well, believe it or not, under Hitler in Germany. So they hightail it out of Germany. They end up at Columbia University, and boom, from there we get this expansion of what I call the religion of academia. It's all based on Marxist tenets, and it's all based on this mutated virus of Marxism moving into the culture. Gramsci even had 5 pillars. I think it was the media, law, family, education. I can't remember the 5th, but it was, we've got to topple these pillars to get the reform, to get the revolution happening in the United States.
Yeah, that's right. And so that worldview that, people talk about Marx's fundamental worldview is based upon economics. And I guess you could say that's true, but I see it, Marx used economics as the tool through which he implemented that worldview. Because at that time, there was no middle class. And I think if you go back and look at it, we would say, yeah, there were some bad things that were happening there. They had a lot of the poor class and so forth. And he seized upon that just in the same way that Marxism today will seize upon those things that have happened to minorities that aren't good. But its whole premise is to stir up a hatred and to paint the oppressor class as the one to be hated, and everything. And that's the second tenet of Marxism that is still part of this new culture Marxism that we see, and that is to destroy all of those systems, those social systems that this hegemonic power has established. And so Marx, a famous statement and quote in the Communist Manifesto, is the abolition of the family. That was all part of this demonic worldview to destroy the social order that God had given to us. So it really is a demonic worldview, because it's attempting to destroy everything that God has established. And what Marx did is say, well, it wasn't God that established, because there is no God. He hated God in his I think it was in his PhD work or whatever it was, his thesis, that how much he hated God. But they said it's this hegemonic power and their systems. That is what you need to hate and to overthrow. And of course, the promise that Marx and Engels gave people was that if you overthrow them, then you get the spoils of all of that. But as you and I both know, and the world knows, history tells us, you go into East Berlin and you don't find a lot of, the bourgeoisie living well. It's a very gray world, deep poverty, interrupted only by the lavish palaces of the Marxist rulers. It's a scam. It is a total scam, and that is what's happening again today. It's a demonic scam.
Now, tell me what you think of this, Del. I look back at Marx and going up into the early 20th century, and you have the Industrial Revolution. There's a technological change. This plays very much into hand, right, with the unionizing. And it's not that I'm not saying all unions are bad. Everybody has their own opinions of that, but it goes toward labor, right, which is Marx was really focused in on labor. Later on, I mean, where you've got now this change from the Frankfurt School and moving into cultural Marxism, there's some additional technological advances that don't play out very well for a biblical liberty worldview, right? In other words, you go back to the 60s, where you have, again, a really big change in culture, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Well, of course, you look at sex, drugs, and rock and roll. What do you have? You have the proliferation of illicit drugs that come about that wasn't available as much before. You have you have television. People see a world outside of themselves more. And of course, you have the pill that comes in the early 60s. And so these technologies come in and play right into the hand, it seems to me, of this religion of academia and a cultural Marxism. Fast forward to our day, you now have the internet and social media. Again, this other exposure to a lot of really bad and pernicious ideas and social pressures that come in with these things.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, here we are again with another huge, I mean, the speed at which we are moving in our culture right now is really alarming. And again, to put your head in the sand and think that these things aren't pernicious is, I feel like we're 60s 2.0. And again, the virus has mutated to a point where it is incredibly successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And it's successful because it also rides the technology. Technology in itself is not evil, but it can be used for evil. And one of the tenets here of Marxism is to stir up hatred, to stir up a sense of it's all about me and I'm being oppressed by the hegemonic power. And what social media does and provides is now the means to be able to stir up a mob internationally, nationally, internationally. We can stir up a mob and we can stir up hatred and we can do all of that we couldn't do before. I mean, you had to, if you wanted to stir up a riot in a city somewhere, you had to get on a bus or drive a car, and you had to go there, and you had to get an apartment, and then you had to find somebody who's kind of a leader down here, and da 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 da. Well, now we have that access to everybody immediately, and it's very easy to take a little incident and inflame it. We were talking to you earlier about the rise of the scoffer. Proverbs says the scoffer sets a city ablaze. And of course, that's what we see happening today. So Marxism rests upon the human heart wanting to hate someone that has something I don't. And so it stirs up that hatred, and we can foment that, but all we have to do is paint this individual as having oppressed you and stolen from you, or whatever that is, stir up that hatred. And of course, technology helps that worldview today as it rails against us.
Well, of course, you have then, again, to me, this worldview is a religion. It's a secular religion, right? It is, because it requires so much of you. If you read the writings of those that are the proponents of critical social justice, critical race theory, identitarianism, it doesn't just inform you of a new idea or a new worldview. It requires your heart, might, mind, and strength. Mm-hmm. You must become an activist. You must see the whole world through this filter of oppressor and victim through critical theory. And ultimately, Del, it just seems to me like eventually, even if you are not rebellious against a God, or even if you're not an atheist, ultimately, where is that ultimate authority? It's God. And so if I've got a worldview of critical theory that takes all authority and turns guidance into oppression, for example, and righteousness into oppression, then it's so natural to move from my institutions or my family members even, or another race or another social orientation, sexual orientation, right over to saying, well, God is the oppressor. Mm-hmm. That's the ultimate authority. And so I'm going to throw off these shackles of the commandments and of living righteously and of God, because I must have, and I'm using air quotes for those that are listening, liberation from all of these things. It just seems, and to push against the church and to push against God, it seems so natural and so subtle, but you see so many people arriving there.
Yeah, and it plays again on the fallen nature of man, which is self-centered and selfish. And you almost touched upon it there, because we see it in the very beginning. Satan comes to Eve and essentially says, Eve, it's all about you. It's all about you, Eve. And God is your oppressor. He's trying to keep you from things that are very, very good. So throw him off. And we go through all of our philosophers, modern philosophers, essentially they were saying that. And Marx is essentially saying the same thing. And the reason we can talk about it, as you did, as being a religion, because it lays the same kind of promise of a utopia before people. And Satan did the same thing for Eve. He laid something better in front of her. Better, I'll do that, air quotes. If you can throw off God, there's something better for you here. Satan did the same thing before Jesus, when in what we call the temptation there. He was trying to lay something better before Jesus. Marx does the same thing. He lays for us this utopia. I don't know if you had a chance. I wrote an article. One of the very first series I did on all of this was kind of highlighting Lenin's song, Imagine. And it became the darling of the communist groups and Marxist groups and socialists and so forth, because he does the same thing in that song, that he lays before. Imagine if there was, nobody owned anything, and it, imagine if there's no heaven, imagine if there's no hell, imagine if there's no God, imagine. And so in in these lyrics and the music, it lays forth this very sweet picture of what this utopia could be if we could just get rid of all of these things. And, you know, it's like Bernie Sanders who said, what a great world it'd be if nobody had to work. Well, wait a second, stop and think about this. And that's quite frankly, that's a good phrase here to talk about Marxism. Stop and think about this, because it's a demonic scam, and it will lead to destruction, just like Jesus said.
So something that comes up a lot when I bring this up with our listeners is, they'll come back and say something along the line. They fall into these kind of traditional dichotomies of left versus right and liberal versus conservative sometimes. And I come back and I say, look, this is not a question of, what is your position on immigration? This is not, let's increase our taxes or have a larger, estate tax. This is not about, supporting or giving more money to the teachers unions or whatever, right? This is so much bigger. This is so different. To me, this is an entirely different animal than looking at this in a lot of ways that people have been conditioned, I think, in this traditional kind of left versus right. This is completely different. This is a religion. This is a worldview that is capturing these hearts and minds of people everywhere. And you had said in here that you talk about how previously we disagreed on issues in politics, but there wasn't the divide that is building right now. I mean, we had the Civil War, as you say, but there wasn't the same level of divide and rift as is in the title of this threat that we have today. Are we going to see a larger polarization, or are we going to be able to pull this back? I mean, the natural result of a different worldview is a chasm, isn't it?
Right. It is. And, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think in what you're reading in one of those articles was that we really did share a common worldview in our country. From the very founding, and it doesn't mean that we operated properly on that biblical worldview. Sometimes we didn't, I agree, and we had a civil war, but there was a common worldview. We disagreed on things. But now it's not a common worldview. It is a worldview battle, and the rift is associated with this major difference in worldview. And the Marxist worldview is a radical different worldview than the biblical worldview. They are absolutely opposed. And so you ask the question, are we going to overcome it? Well, I'll tell you what will happen. One of these worldviews is going to win. It's a battle. It's a worldview battle, and one of these worldviews is going to win. This is not just some new kind of enlightenment thing. We're not going to come to a new level of understanding here. This is a battle, and all you have to do is look. Open your eyes and look. The Marxist worldview wants to destroy the family. It wants to destroy the whole notion of human sexuality. It wants to destroy all the other institutions, the church, of course. It wants to destroy labor, which is very interesting because that was the centerpiece of Marx, was to destroy the notion of free enterprise, and all the means of production be held by the state. It also wants to destroy the state. And a lot of people get confused by that because they say, wait a second, isn't socialism statism? It is, but Marx laid forward the utopia that there would be no state. Well, that's a lie, because, China, we call China a communist country. It's not technically a communist country. Because the state still rules, and in this scam, it will never get beyond that, because the Marxist leaders will live in palaces and they will rule, and they are not going to go to the next stage. But it's attempting to destroy what I believe is God's design for the state, in the same way as destroying God's design for human sexuality and so forth. So this is not just a philosophical difference of opinion here. We're talking about a radical battle to the death. A lot of people have said that at the hands of Marxism, there have been at least 100 million deaths. We're not talking about a philosophy. This is a major worldview battle that has, at the essence, the life of people and the end of their souls. So it's big. It's huge.
And the destruction of faith. I mean, it's
yes,
absolute destruction of faith. Now,
correct.
Yeah. So China is not technically, to say, the utopia that they're looking for. Obviously, it's not. But that's just the other, part of that Hegelian dialectic, right? It's getting to the point again where you become so liberated. They call this the new man, right? You become so liberated that you don't need the state because everybody is Marxist, and therefore, with that running in you, in your heart and your mind, you've thrown off the shackles of everything, and it's pure liberation, which really just means pure chaos.
Right, that's exactly
what that ends up with. Now, you bring up Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, which is excellent, and I would recommend that anybody go out and read that book. I love this phrase you quote from him, going back to your threat number 3, malevolent compassion.
Yes.
And how this works. He says they get their way, speaking of the Marxists, not by the Marxists today. They get their way not by shedding blood, right? That's old school, but by shedding tears. That's just a great statement because that's exactly, it just lays out exactly how this whole ideology works today. You don't need a revolution today in the West. It won't work. We're too strong. Yeah, of gunpowder and sword. It's not going to work. But boy, again, if you can capture the hearts through a malevolent compassion, as we're seeing again at light speed right now, you can capture the entire culture.
Yeah, and that of course I borrow sometimes from the imagery in Revelation, and I need to be careful when I do that. But we have this imagery in Revelation of the harlot that is riding the beast, and the harlot is in the scripture, of course, is the harlot is this perversion of the female, and we talked about her being driven by grace and compassion, and the virtuous female, that compassion is bridled by truth and righteousness and wisdom. But we throw that away. What we have here is this harlot that is riding on top of everything. It becomes our prime ethic. And we have made everybody believe that the idea of compassion is the prime ethic, but it's an unbridled compassion. And so it causes us to embrace evil. So all we have to do is bring someone who is doing something biblically wrong and evil, but we bring them in front of people and have them cry a little bit. And we all have to say, oh my goodness, how horrible this is, how unjust, how unequitable this is. And what it does is it causes us to reach out and put our arms around evil, to embrace evil, and so forth. And so, yeah, that phrase I took from her is just absolutely perfect, because that's exactly what's happening now. The Marxists used to force people the edge of the sword, but now all they have to do is shed a tear, and we all fall in place.
Yeah, it's in some ways more powerful. It's because obviously if you've got violence and force, then you're going to stand up and fight against it. Whereas if it makes you shed some tears, well, I can go right along with it. Now, you talk about free speech also. This is something that's very interesting to me because, again, if you go back to the 60s, and you have at that time, all it was a bunch of fringe social studies teachers, that are the hardcore Marxists on campuses. Now it's much, 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 much more pervasive with these Marxian tenets. But you got these fringe teachers, they go out and they help organize these protests, and you get out of Berkeley, right? You get the free speech movement. Well, you go back and look at that in the 60s, where that's coming from. Right? Why do they want free speech so much? Why are they pushing for this so much? Well, the reason is because you have let's call it a liberty framework in place of free speech, where we're looking at these ideas as ridiculous, pernicious as we should. So the free speech oftentimes that they're talking about is, no, we need to be able to get these tenets into the schools. We need to be able to get these tenets into and I say universities, but indicate 12 and everywhere else. This is the movement of free speech. And the way I think, Del, that you can put a barometer on the change in culture is now today you see the move against free speech by the institutions, right? By the universities. It's the exact opposite. Why? Because they have captured these universities. They have captured the institutions. They have captured the culture. And so looking at what has happened there in those 60 years or so is very obvious to me, simply by looking at this principle of free speech. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. And I think a good way to understand all this is that a lot of times Marxism in particular, and anything that is evil, the scripture calls Satan the angel of light, so he looks good. So we come up with these phrases, like we use in the abortion industry, about choice. And so we paint the pig with really pretty pictures. And so free speech, what really meant no boundaries. That's what it really meant. Free speech meant no ethical boundaries. So you are not allowing the people who want to speak for things that we call evil to speak, but there's really no boundaries. And so no boundaries then today says, if you speak of boundaries, we're going to shut you up. So we just saw that. I mean, Riley Gaines, here she is. She's just trying to save women's sports, right? And she gets physically punched and harassed and has to flee and hide in a room. A judge is coming to speak on campus about free speech, and he gets shouted down. So this is the normal pathway of Marxism. Okay, so it will come to the oppressed class and say, we're here to help you, and so on and so forth. But it will end up in violence. It always will end up in violence to destroy those who stand with it. In fact, remember Lenin, that was the third tenet of all of this, is that Lenin said it's a new description of ethics and moral values. And so the new description of moral values is that is good, which promotes our worldview. That is evil, which stands in the way. And that is exactly what we see happening today. So if you want to stand up for a biblical understanding of human sexuality today, that is going to be called evil. It would be called hatred. It would be called hate mongering. And it will be even now used to raise a form of violence against you. So yeah, that's what is happening.
Yeah, and of course that goes back to number one, right? The scoffer and how effective that really is. I'd never really understood that until the last number of years, just how effective the idea of shame, public shame is.
Yes.
Of course, with social media, it changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to Lenin again, a lot of people haven't really read about Lenin, and there's a lot of professors and others that will talk about, well, he wasn't that bad, and it's the beginning. You can go back and look at Stalin. Yeah, he was a monster, but you go back and you read about Lenin. These guys, these tyrants, are not just about power. Now, that certainly plays a part, but you read the lives of these individuals, what they sacrificed. What did they sacrifice? They sacrificed for this worldview. They are absorbed in this. I mean, there's no way to get around understanding that these aren't just some guys using a tool for power. Power is certainly a part of it, but they have adopted and are die hard with this Marxist worldview. You can't read about them and think anything different.
No, that's exactly right. And that's why it's proper to call this a religion, because it has everything associated with the religion, it has everything associated with the worldview. But the promise of this utopia, in my mind, is the ultimate thing that buries itself in the heart of a Marxist. They believe in it so fervently. And that's why they embraced Lenin's song so much, and why Lenin himself. I mean, he was a Marxist, and so because they believed it was this utopia. It's how we're going to save everybody. I mean, you think about how a false gospel.
Mhm.
You know, Jesus says, "Look, let me tell you what saves souls. Let me tell you what will eventually bring about the restoration of all things. And it is me, and it is the sacrifice I made for people." The false gospel says, no, there is no God, and all of that is bad. But what will happen is this utopia will come if you can just turn away from God and turn away everything that he has said to you and follow this path. And so it becomes religious fervor. And if you talk to Marxists or read them, as you have and I have, but if you actually talk to people who really have bought this, they are zealots.
Yes.
They are evangelists, so don't take this lightly. These are people who have bought this, hook, line, and sinker, if you want to use that analogy.
Yeah. So, Del, you obviously are putting out these types of things like these 7 threats. You try and make people aware of these pernicious ideologies. I try to do that in my own way on the podcast. I think awareness is a very important thing to understand what is going on. In studying this for me for the last 11 years, I've come to a different idea of where we're at. This is so much worse than I think people realize with what is happening in the U.S. and in this West and in the West, and how this national rift. I'm very concerned about how this is going to polarize. And how we're going to hold this together. I oftentimes think understanding where this is and how this ideology works, I feel in some ways, and maybe I'm off base on this, but I feel that our job to some degree is to say, look, it's raining, and it's raining hard. And you might think this is just a storm passing through, but this is a flood. And if you're not ready for this, these waters are going to rise and you're going to get swept away with it. And that's you individually, your family, your civilization. I feel in some ways like you have to tell everyone to get in the ark to some degree. It's like, look, you make your own choices, but understand what is coming here. And that, I'm not trying to be a fearmonger or doomsdayer. I don't get into those types of things at all. But it's hard when you look closely at the 20th century and then you look at this actually happening in the US and in the West, and its pervasiveness at this point, not to see this rain that is falling as something very concerning.
Well, it is concerning, and it should be. And I think this is not the time for God's people to hide their head in the sand. We need to recognize and understand the threat. But we also don't need to fall into the hand-wringing, the heart-melting, that would betray that we have a hope before us, that those who are in Christ have a hope before us. Now, I think the solution here is the changing of the hearts and minds of the individual. And that leads us to what we have been doing, in the engagement project, to call people to do what the Lord has asked us to do, to begin to build those deep relationships with those people who live in our Jerusalem, who live around us, to build those deep relationships with them, to be able to answer those questions, to eventually, hopefully, pray that God will lead them to Christ. That is what's going to change. The only solution to an individual who is a fervent religious Marxist is to come to Christ. That is the solution. And if the people of God begin to do that, then we could see a change. It's going to be very difficult to change it up here. I'm not saying we don't fight that up here, and it could well be that we will end up, it's possible we could even end up in a war against this. But we need to be doing that battle with the hearts and minds of individuals, and that's what the people of God are called to do.
Well, it almost seems, Del, that with how powerful, again, this virus has mutated and how powerful this secular religion is, I don't know if there's anything else that is strong enough to perhaps help people push this off and fight against it, except for a true religious fervor, right? A righteousness and an understanding of Christ's sacrifice and et cetera. I don't know if there's anything that when the rubber hits the road here and this train of Marxism that's kind of running down the track, I don't know if there's anything else that's going to be strong enough to hold people off.
No, if you sit back and take a look at the wave, I think the word you use is a good word, flood. The flood that is now all of a sudden, it seems like we went to sleep in COVID and we woke up and we look outside and there's a tsunami and we say, where in the world does it come from? Well, it didn't just appear overnight. It's been building, as you said, from the Frankfurt School and so forth. And but it's a tsunami. And the reason is because academia has basically been sold this, primarily higher academia has been sold this. A lot of our media have bought this. Now increasingly technology giants have sold this. It has infiltrated a great number of our judicial systems and political systems and so forth. And so it's a force. It's a major force. But remember, it is a worldview that is held by individual people. And the solution to that is to change the worldview of those individual people. And so I think it's important for we as the people of God to be praying for these people who are major proponents of this. If you see somebody and you recognize now and say, this is an individual who is deeply caught up in this religion of Marxism, a demonic religion, well, why not dedicate yourself to pray? Ask God, would you bring someone into their life? Maybe it's me, who knows? Maybe I have close contact with them. Bring a believer in Christ into their life who will begin to pray for them, that we might see them change, because it's the heart and mind of the individual here that is at issue.
Yeah, agreed. Well, again, Del, we could talk on this for hours. This is a definite threat right in our face here today, and appreciate your knowledge and helping people become more aware of this. Next time, we're going to go to threat number 6, which is America, addicted and soft, dependent and lost. I'm looking forward to that conversation as well. Thanks again, Del, for joining us.
My pleasure, Greg. Thank you.